and you can't stay here anymore, my father said, his voice as smooth and casual as if he were commenting on the weather, as if he weren't just tearing my entire existence out from under me. He didn't even look up from the Christmas ham he was slicing, his thick hands steady as he worked, the carving knife glinting under the soft glow of the dining room chandelier. My mother, sitting primly in her chair, gave a slight nod of agreement, her lips pursed in that familiar expression of silent approval, while my brother, seated across from me, didn't even bother to lift his gaze from his plate, his fingers absently toying with the edge of his napkin like he hadn't just heard our father cast me aside like an unwanted guest overstaying her welcome. For a long, terrible moment I sat frozen, my fork suspended midair, my brain struggling to process the weight of those words, the sheer cruelty of them, the absolute finality behind them. It wasn't a request. It wasn't a suggestion. It was a decision that had been made without me, one that had been waiting for the perfect moment to be delivered, like some perverse holiday surprise wrapped in the stench of betrayal. "Excuse me?" I finally managed, my voice quiet, barely more than a whisper, because surely I had misheard him. Surely he hadn't just told his own daughter, the same daughter who had spent years ensuring that this very house, this very dinner, this very comfortable existence they all enjoyed could even exist in the first place, that I was no longer welcome. My father sighed then, the kind of sigh that people give when they're inconvenienced, like he was tired of explaining something I should have already understood, like he couldn't be bothered to soften the blow. "It's time, Aaron," he said, setting down the knife and finally meeting my eyes, his gaze as steady as it was indifferent. "You've been here long enough. Your mother and I want our space back. It's nothing personal. We just think it's best if you go. Nothing personal." I let out a short, breathless laugh, though there was no humor in it, just a sharp, bitter edge that cut through the warmth of the holiday setting like a blade. "Nothing personal?" I repeated, my fingers tightening around the stem of my wine glass, my pulse roaring in my ears, drowning out the soft hum of Christmas music playing in the background. "Are you serious right now?" My mother let out a soft noise of disapproval, dabbing at the corner of her mouth with a napkin, as if the entire conversation were nothing more than an unfortunate hiccup in an otherwise pleasant evening. "We just think it's time you figure things out on your own," she said, her voice cool, measured, carrying that same thin veneer of politeness she always used when dismissing something she didn't want to deal with. "Figure things out?" I blinked at her, my stomach twisting, my breath catching in my throat, because this wasn't making sense. None of this was making any sense. I had spent years carrying them, shouldering the weight of their debts, their medical bills, their mortgage payments, making sure that they never had to worry about money, about their future, about whether or not they could afford to live comfortably. I had made sacrifices, real, tangible sacrifices, to keep this family afloat, to ensure that my mother could continue her weekly spa appointments, that my father could keep his car despite never making a single payment on it, that my brother, a grown man with no job and no ambition, could continue living in comfort without ever having to lift a damn finger. And now, on Christmas Eve, after everything I had done, after every single time I had stepped up when no one else would, they were throwing me away like I was nothing? I turned to my brother then, waiting, hoping, begging silently for him to say something, to push back, to at least pretend that he cared. But he wouldn't even meet my eyes, his shoulders hunched as he shoveled another bite of mashed potatoes into his mouth, as if he could somehow make himself small enough to disappear into the background. "Coward." "Wow," I whispered, shaking my head, swallowing against the sudden lump in my throat. "You really mean this?" My father simply nodded, reaching for his glass of whiskey, taking a slow sip before setting it back down with a quiet clink against the polished wood of the table. "You'll be fine, Aaron," he said, like he was doing me a favor, like he hadn't just ripped the ground out from beneath me without a second thought. "You always are." And that was it. That was the moment I realized there was nothing left to fight for. I pushed my chair back, the legs scraping against the hardwood, the sound loud, jarring, cutting through the suffocating weight of betrayal pressing against my chest. "Okay," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. I'll pack my things tomorrow. If I had expected a reaction, any sign of hesitation or regret, I would have been disappointed. Because my father just nodded, my mother simply resumed eating, and my brother, my own brother, didn't even look up. They had made their choice. Now, it was time for me to make mine. And I already knew exactly what I was going to do. I barely slept that night, lying awake in the cold silence of my childhood bedroom, staring at the ceiling as my father's words echoed over and over in my head, looping like a cruel joke I couldn't quite wrap my mind around. You're a burden, and you can't stay here anymore. I repeated it to myself, mouthing the words in the darkness, feeling them settle deep inside me, pressing into every raw, vulnerable place I had tried so hard to ignore. I had expected the pain, of course. I had expected the gut-wrenching sense of loss, the disbelief, the unbearable weight of knowing that my own parents had looked at me, after everything I had done, after everything I had given, and decided I wasn't worth keeping around. What I hadn't expected was the clarity that came with it, the sudden and undeniable realization that if they wanted me gone, then they would get exactly what they asked for, and everything that came with it. By the time the first slivers of morning light crept through the curtains, my decision was made. I was done. I wasn't going to cry. I wasn't going to plead. I wasn't going to beg them to reconsider, to take it back, to act like they had any love left for me, because now I knew the truth. There was no love. There never had been. There had only ever been expectations, responsibilities, obligations that I had carried alone while they sat back and reaped the benefits. So I got up, walked into the bathroom, and stared at my own reflection in the mirror, studying the face of a woman who had spent years being the strong one, the dependable one, the one who always made things right no matter how badly she had been treated. And for the first time in my life, I felt something close to pity for the woman staring back at me. I had wasted so many years waiting for them to see me, and now they finally would. When I stepped out into the hallway, the house was already stirring, my mother humming to herself in the kitchen, the smell of coffee filling the air, my father rustling through the morning newspaper. My brother still asleep in his room like the overgrown man-child he was. Everything was normal. Everything was exactly as it had been before. Except for me. I walked past them without a word, heading straight to my room, grabbing my suitcase from the closet, pulling open drawers with calm, deliberate movements, folding my clothes neatly as I packed, not rushing, not hesitating, not faltering. I could hear my mother pause in the kitchen, could feel the way my father glanced up from his paper, could sense the flicker of confusion that passed between them as they finally realized that I wasn't sulking, wasn't lashing out, wasn't demanding explanations or apologies. No, I was leaving. And they had never expected that. "Aaron," my mother called out, her voice carrying that familiar, condescending edge, like she was talking to a child who was making too much of a fuss over something trivial. "What are you doing?" I didn't stop folding my sweater, didn't pause as I zipped up the first suitcase. "Packing," I said simply, my voice even, measured, giving away nothing. There was a long, uncomfortable silence before she finally spoke again. "Well, there's no need to be so dramatic," she sighed, stepping into the doorway, arms crossed, watching me like I was throwing some kind of tantrum. "We just think it's time for you to be on your own, that's all. You're a grown woman, Aaron. This is what's best." I zipped the second suitcase shut. "Right," I said, nodding slowly, my hands steady, my heart startlingly calm for someone who had just been thrown out like yesterday's garbage. "And if that's what you want, then that's what you'll get." She blinked, tilting her head slightly, as if she couldn't quite figure out why I wasn't breaking down, why I wasn't arguing, why I wasn't fighting for a place in a family that had never really been mine. My father appeared then, standing behind her, watching the scene unfold, still holding his coffee mug, still wearing the smug expression of a man who thought he had the upper hand. They still didn't get it. But they would. I grabbed my phone from the nightstand, scrolled through my banking app, and with one quick motion, I stopped every single automatic payment connected to their accounts. Then I turned around and finally looked at them. "You're on your own now," I said, watching as confusion flickered into something else, something dangerously close to fear. My mother frowned, shifting uncomfortably. "What are you talking about?" I smiled then, slow and deliberate, letting the silence stretch between us, letting them sit in the not knowing for just a little longer. "I've been paying the mortgage," I said, my voice soft but unyielding. "And the car insurance. And the medical bills. And the utilities. And, oh yeah, Mom's credit card." Silence. Cold, heavy, suffocating silence. My father's face lost its color first, his grip tightening on the coffee mug, his body going rigid, like a man realizing that the ground beneath him wasn't just shaking, it was disappearing entirely. My mother started, but she stopped herself, because what could she even say? They had wanted me gone. Now they had nothing. I let out a soft breath, feeling the weight lift from my shoulders, feeling free for the first time in my life. "You wanted your space," I said, grabbing my suitcase, rolling it toward the front door without looking back. "Enjoy it." As I reached the threshold, my father finally snapped out of his stunned silence, his voice sharp, desperate in a way I had never heard before. "Aaron, wait," but I didn't. I walked out, stepped into my car, started the engine, and drove away, never looking back, never feeling the need to. Because for the first time, I was finally free. And they? They had just lost the one person holding their entire world together. The first voicemail came 2 days after I left, my mother's voice tight with forced calm, the kind she used when she was pretending everything was fine, but barely holding it together. "Aaron, sweetheart, I think there's been some sort of mix-up," she said, her words clipped, controlled, deliberate. "I just got off the phone with the bank, and they said the mortgage payment wasn't received this month. I'm sure it's just a glitch or something, so when you get a chance, just give me a call back and we'll get it sorted out." I didn't call her back. The second voicemail came the next day, this time from my father, his voice lacking the same patience, his usual arrogance slipping at the edges. "All right, Aaron, I don't know what kind of game you think you're playing, but this isn't funny," he said, his tone sharp, angry, like he was entitled to an explanation he didn't deserve. "We know you handle the bills, so just fix it already. Don't make this harder than it has to be." I smiled as I deleted the message, shaking my head at the audacity, at the sheer entitlement of a man who had spent years benefiting from my generosity, but never once acknowledging it. He still thought I was going to fix it, still believed that I would come running back, still assumed that I was just throwing a fit that would pass in a day or two. But by the end of the week, when the third voicemail came in, I knew reality had finally sunk in. This time, it was my brother. "Aaron, hey, listen, I know things got kinda weird the other night, but Mom and Dad are freaking out," he started, his voice awkward, unsure, like he was realizing for the first time that maybe he should have spoken up that night. Maybe he should have done something instead of sitting there like a spineless idiot. "The bank keeps calling, something about late payments, and Dad was on the phone all morning trying to figure out why the credit card stopped working. I don't know what you did, but can you fix it? Please?" I laughed, actually laughed out loud, because the way he said it, the way he framed it, the way he spoke as if I had broken something that had been working perfectly fine on its own was so absurd, so ridiculous, so completely delusional that it almost didn't seem real. I hadn't broken anything. I had simply stopped fixing it. By the second week, I stopped checking the messages altogether, letting them pile up in my inbox, each one growing more frantic than the last, each one dripping with desperation, with disbelief, with the slow, painful realization that they had no idea how to survive without me. The fallout came in waves, each one hitting them harder than the last. The first was the mortgage default notice taped to their front door, a thick, glaring envelope marked with urgent warnings about missed payments, about deadlines, about what would happen if they didn't find a way to come up with the money I had always provided without question. Then came the car repossession, a tow truck rolling up in the early morning hours, my father standing in the driveway in his robe, his face red with fury, screaming at the man who didn't care about his outrage, who had a job to do, who was taking away the car he had always driven but never actually paid for. The credit cards were frozen next, my mother's face probably going pale at the register as she tried to swipe for groceries, only to be met with an angry beep, an apologetic look from the cashier. A public humiliation she had never experienced before. I could picture it all so clearly, the arguments, the blame, the frantic realization that they had built their entire world on the assumption that I would always be there to clean up the mess. Except I wasn't. And they had no idea what to do without me. By the time my father called again, his voice was different, missing its usual sharp edge, missing the condescending tone, missing the unwavering certainty that he was the one in control. "Aaron," he said, his voice quieter than I had ever heard it, less angry, more desperate. "I know you're upset. I know you think we were unfair. But this isn't you. You're not the type of person who would just abandon her family over a misunderstanding." I leaned back in my chair, phone pressed to my ear, listening to the man who had sat across from me on Christmas Eve and told me to get out of his house. He still didn't get it. He still thought I was going to save him. I didn't delete the message this time, because I wasn't done yet. I still had one more move to play. I had spent years being the one they could always rely on, the one they called whenever things went wrong, the one who made sure they never had to feel the weight of their own irresponsibility, and now, for the first time, they were beginning to understand what life looked like without me cleaning up after them. The house, the car, the endless bills they never seemed to think about. Everything had always been handled, always taken care of, always swept under the rug without so much as a second thought. They never asked where the money came from, never wondered how things always got paid on time, never once stopped to consider what would happen if I decided to stop carrying them. And yet, when they sat across from me at that Christmas dinner, they had looked me in the eye and told me I was the burden. The irony of it all was almost laughable. The messages had started changing now, less anger, more desperation, my mother's voice shaking as she left voicemails begging me to just call them back, my father growing quieter with every attempt, my brother's texts going from dismissive to pleading as he slowly realized that the comfortable life he had been coasting through was about to fall apart in ways he couldn't even begin to understand. But I wasn't done. They thought they had lost everything, but they hadn't even begun to see what real loss looked like. Because I still had one last card to play. I sat at my kitchen table, scrolling through old emails, pulling up the documentation I had nearly forgotten about, the legal paperwork I had signed years ago when my parents had nearly lost the house, when they had come to me, tears in their eyes, asking for my help, swearing they would do better, swearing they wouldn't take advantage of me, swearing that I was the only one who could save them. I had been younger then, still hopeful, still believing that if I just tried hard enough, I could make them see me as someone worth loving, worth appreciating, worth keeping around. So I had signed the papers. I had co-signed the house. My name wasn't just on the bills, wasn't just on the accounts that were now unpaid and spiraling into collections, it was on the deed itself. They thought they owned the house outright. They thought they had control. They thought wrong. I let that realization settle in, let the weight of it spread through me, not as guilt, not as hesitation, but as something else entirely, as justice, as retribution, as a lesson they should have learned a long time ago. I picked up my phone, dialed the real estate attorney's number, and set everything in motion. By the end of the week, the paperwork was filed. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The knock on their door came early in the morning, a crisp winter wind biting at their skin as they opened it to find the legal notice waiting for them, the reality of their situation finally slamming into them with full force. The house wasn't theirs. It never had been. They had called me a burden, had dismissed me like I was nothing, had treated me like I was disposable, but now, they were the ones with nowhere to go. I didn't answer when my mother called, her voice frantic, choked with panic, the controlled composure she had always worn finally cracking at the seams. I didn't respond when my brother sent message after message, accusing me of ruining their lives, demanding to know how I could do this to my own family, as if he had ever once treated me like family himself. And I didn't even listen when my father, the man who had carved the Christmas ham and told me to leave like it was nothing, left a voicemail with only 3 words. "We need you." I smiled as I deleted it. Because now, finally, they understood what it felt like to be discarded. I had been expecting them for days, had known that once the reality of their situation truly sank in, they would come looking for me, not because they regretted what they had done, not because they had suddenly realized how terribly they had treated me, but because they still believed, deep down, that I would fix it. They thought that no matter how far they had pushed me, no matter how many times they had dismissed me, no matter how easily they had discarded me when they thought they didn't need me anymore, that I would still be there, waiting in the background, ready to clean up their mess. They were wrong. I was in the middle of an afternoon meeting when I saw them through the glass doors of my office building, my mother clutching her purse like it was the only thing grounding her, my father standing stiffly beside her, his face tight with the weight of losing everything. My brother wasn't with them, and I wasn't surprised. He had never been the type to show up when things got hard, had never been the one to fight battles unless there was something in it for him. I watched them for a moment, watched as my mother wrung her hands together, watched as my father looked around, shifting uncomfortably as if standing in a place where he had to ask for something rather than demand it was physically painful for him. I didn't rush to greet them. I didn't pretend to be busy, didn't pretend I hadn't seen them, didn't pretend I was going to avoid this. I simply finished my meeting, let them wait, let them sit in their own desperation for just a little longer. When I finally walked through the lobby doors, their heads snapped toward me so fast it was almost comical, my mother's face twisting with something that looked close to relief, my father's jaw tightening as he realized this wasn't going to go the way he wanted. "Aaron," my mother started, her voice trembling slightly, though whether it was from nerves or embarrassment, I couldn't tell. "Sweetheart, please, we need to talk." I nodded, motioning toward the small seating area in the corner of the lobby, making no effort to hide the fact that I was completely unaffected by the sight of them. They had always expected me to be emotional, to break down, to argue, to plead, to fight for their approval, and now, as I sat across from them with a calm, unreadable expression, I could see the discomfort settle over them, the realization that they no longer had control. "We need your help," my mother continued, leaning forward slightly, her voice dropping into something softer, something she probably thought sounded like maternal concern, but to me, it was just another layer of manipulation. "The bank won't listen to us, the house, Aaron, we're going to lose everything." I tilted my head slightly, letting her words hang in the air for a moment, watching as my father shifted beside her, his hands clenched into fists, his eyes darting toward the floor like he couldn't bring himself to look at me. "That sounds awful," I said finally, my voice even, polite, unbothered. "I really hope you figure something out." My mother's eyes widened, her breath catching, my father finally snapping his head up to look at me, his shock turning into something uglier, something closer to rage. "What the hell is wrong with you?" he snapped, his voice rising, his composure slipping for the first time. "This isn't funny, Aaron. You don't do this to family." I smiled then, slow and deliberate, letting the silence stretch, letting the words sink in, letting them feel the weight of their own hypocrisy. "Family doesn't throw you away like garbage," I said simply, my voice steady, unwavering, final. And for the first time, I saw it, the realization, the understanding, the cold, undeniable truth settling over them. They had lost me, and they were never getting me back. I sat at my desk, a blank sheet of paper in front of me, the pen resting between my fingers, waiting for the words to come, waiting for the anger to rise, waiting for the bitterness to settle in my chest the way it had so many times before. But as I stared at the empty page, as I let the silence stretch around me, I realized something that made my grip on the pen loosen, made my shoulders relax, made my breath come a little easier. I wasn't angry anymore. For the first time in my life, I wasn't holding onto the weight of their betrayal, wasn't feeling the sharp sting of their rejection, wasn't replaying the moment my father had looked me in the eye and thrown me away like I was nothing. The anger had burned bright, had fueled me, had pushed me forward when I needed it to, but now, as I sat here, in my own home, in my own space, in a life that no longer revolved around begging them to see my worth, I realized that I had already won. Still, I picked up the pen. I let the words come, let them spill onto the page, Let them exist outside of me for the first time. You always told me I was strong, that I could handle anything, that I was different from Julia because she needed more, because she struggled, because she wasn't built to carry the weight of the world the way I was. But what you really meant was that you could use me without guilt, that you could take from me without consequence, that you could place every responsibility on my shoulders and never have to look back to see if I was breaking under it. Because you never cared if I was. As long as the bills were paid, as long as the money kept coming, as long as you could continue living your life without sacrifice, I was exactly what you needed me to be. I paused, staring at the words, feeling the truth of them, feeling the weight of every sacrifice I had made, every moment I had given, every year I had spent trying to be enough for people who never saw me as more than a resource. And yet, despite it all, I wasn't broken. I kept writing. You thought I needed you, that no matter what you said, no matter how you treated me, no matter how many times you made it clear that I wasn't wanted, that I would always come back. You thought that I would never be able to walk away because I loved you, because I believed in family, because I had spent my whole life trying to be a daughter you could be proud of. But what you never realized was that love isn't about obligation, and family isn't about blood. Love is a choice. Family is who chooses you. And you never chose me. I sat back, exhaling slowly, letting the finality of it settle into my bones, letting the peace of it wash over me in a way that felt more satisfying than any revenge ever could. I folded the letter, placed it in an envelope, and set it on the table beside me, but I knew, even as I did it, that I would never send it. Because they didn't need to read it. They already knew. They knew the moment I walked out of that house. They knew the moment they lost everything and realized I wasn't coming back to fix it. They knew the moment my father sat across from me in that office lobby, his voice shaking with desperation, his arrogance shattered, his world crumbling around him, and I had simply smiled and walked away. They knew. And now, so did I. I picked up the envelope, held it between my fingers for a moment, then tossed it into the fireplace, watching as the flames licked at the edges, watching as the words turned to ash, watching as the last piece of them that lived inside of me burned away. I didn't need revenge. I didn't need apologies. I didn't need them. I turned away from the fire, away from the past, away from the people who had never truly been mine to begin with. And as I walked into the next chapter of my life, I whispered the words I had waited so long to say, the words that had once felt impossible, the words that now felt like freedom itself. Family isn't blood. It's who chooses you. And I choose to leave.